March 15th, 1947. Brooklyn. Meyer Lansky spread photographs of Bumpy Johnson across the mahogany table like a card dealer, revealing a losing hand. Each image showed the same man, tall, dignified, moving through Harlem streets with the confidence of royalty walking his kingdom. Lansky's finger tapped one photo with rhythmic precision. This Negro has controlled Harlem for 10 years. Bugsy wants Las Vegas clean, free of complications, but New York still has this obstacle. Lucky Luciano leaned back in his leather chair, the kind that cost more than most families earned in a year, and lit a Cuban cigar with the casual ease of a man who had never worried about money or consequences. Smoke curled toward the ceiling as he spoke words that carried decades of assumed superiority. A Negro sitting where white men should be. It's an insult to the natural order we built. The men around the table nodded, comfortable in their certainty, blind to the fact that their confidence would become their greatest vulnerability. They saw Bumpy Johnson as a problem to be solved with traditional methods, overwhelming force, brutal efficiency, the kind of violence that had always worked before. What they didn't see, couldn't imagine in their most paranoid nightmares, was that the man in those photographs had spent his entire life preparing for exactly this moment. Bugsy Siegel studied the photographs with eyes that had watched men die and felt nothing beyond mild satisfaction at a job completed. The man who had built Las Vegas from desert sand and blood money, who had killed his way from the streets of Brooklyn to the boardrooms of casino empires, knew how to recognize threats. His instincts, honed by 3 decades of survival in a world where mistakes meant death, were screaming that this situation required careful attention. He's not just strong in Harlem. He has respect. Real respect. The kind you can't buy or beat into people. That's dangerous in ways money and guns can't fix. Lansky smiled with the thin satisfaction of a chess player who had already calculated the next 5 moves. Respect doesn't stop bullets, Benjamin. You proved that in the Nevada desert dozens of times. A man with respect but no backup is just a corpse waiting for the right moment. The other men laughed, comfortable in their certainty, surrounded by decades of success that told them their methods were infallible. They had eliminated union leaders, political reformers, rival gangsters, anyone who stood in their way. Bumpy Johnson was just another obstacle, maybe more respected than most, but still just flesh and bone that could be perforated by lead. Their laughter echoed through the room, confident and cruel, the sound of predators who had forgotten that sometimes prey evolved into something more dangerous. But what none of them knew, what they couldn't have known because their arrogance made certain kinds of people invisible to them, was that every word spoken in that Brooklyn meeting room was being memorized with perfect precision. Dorothy Williams, 53 years old, had worked as a secretary for Meyer Lansky's organization for 11 years. She served coffee, filed papers, cleaned ashtrays, existed in that peculiar space that domestic workers occupied in the minds of powerful white men. Necessary but not quite human, functional but not conscious, present but not listening. They spoke freely around her the way people talk freely around furniture, never considering that furniture might have ears, memory, and loyalty to someone other than the man signing paychecks. Dorothy had grown up in Harlem, raised her 3 children in a tenement on 125th Street, buried her husband after he died from pneumonia because no white hospital would treat a Negro man who couldn't pay cash up front. She knew exactly who Bumpy Johnson was, what he meant to her community, and what would happen to Harlem if these men succeeded in removing him. At 11:15 that night, a telephone rang in an apartment above the Cotton Club. Bumpy Johnson answered on the second ring, voice calm and alert the way it always was, the voice of a man who understood that survival meant never being fully asleep. "Mr. Johnson, they're coming for you. Thursday night, 10:15 when you cross West 116. 11 men, professionals from Murder Incorporated. They're taking you to Warehouse 347 at the docks." Bumpy listened without interrupting, asking 3 precise questions that told him everything he needed to know, then thanked Dorothy with genuine warmth and promised her family would be protected regardless of what happened next. He hung up the phone and sat in darkness for 10 minutes, thinking through scenarios, calculating odds, seeing moves and counter-moves like a chess grandmaster playing against opponents who didn't know the game had already begun. Bumpy Johnson had not risen to control Harlem through luck or random chance, or the kind of mindless violence that left bodies scattered and problems unsolved. At 42 years old, he had survived 3 decades in a world where men died for mistakes that lasted 5 seconds, where hesitation meant death and overconfidence meant worse. His reputation was built on 2 foundations that seemed contradictory, but were actually perfectly complementary. He could be absolutely brutal when brutality served his interests, and he could be 3 steps ahead of everyone else through pure strategic thinking. The revolver he carried was his backup plan, his last resort, the weapon he used when intelligence and planning failed. His real weapon, the thing that kept him alive and powerful, was the ability to know what was coming before it arrived, to see patterns other men missed, to turn enemy plans into traps that closed around the planners. Every scar on his body told a story of survival. Every decision he made carried the weight of lessons learned from watching other men die from predictable mistakes. He had built a network of information that spread through Harlem like invisible roots, connecting him to maids in white men's houses, porters in train stations, bartenders in mob clubs, shoeshine boys outside police headquarters. People that powerful men ignored provided Bumpy with intelligence that no amount of money could buy, and he protected those people with ferocity that ensured their loyalty was absolute. Since 1935, when he had fled Greenville, South Carolina, after nearly being lynched for the crime of looking at a white woman in a way some man with a rope decided was wrong, Bumpy had understood a truth that shaped every decision he made afterward. Black men in America only survived by being smarter than white men with guns, not stronger, because strength could be overwhelmed by numbers, not richer, because wealth without power was just money waiting to be taken. Smarter, always thinking 3 steps ahead when everyone else was reacting to the present moment, always appearing cooperative while building escape routes, always seeming vulnerable while preparing traps. The night he ran from that South Carolina town, hiding in the woods while hunting dogs bayed and torches turned night into flickering hell, he had made himself a promise. Never again would he be the prey. Never again would he let other men decide his fate. He would become the hunter, the strategist, the man who saw danger coming and turned it into opportunity. 13 years later, he had transformed that promise into an empire, controlling the numbers racket, the drug trade, the protection services that kept Harlem's businesses safe from both criminals and corrupt police. White crime bosses tolerated his presence because they assumed a Negro could never be a real threat, could never match their sophistication, would eventually make a mistake they could exploit. Their racism was his greatest advantage, their assumptions his sharpest weapon. Bugsy Siegel organized the operation with the precision that had made him a legend in organized crime circles. 11 soldiers, every one of them a veteran of Murder Incorporated, the enforcement arm that had eliminated dozens of targets over the past decade. These were not amateur thugs or street criminals playing at being tough. These were professionals who had killed union organizers in Detroit, rival gangsters in Philadelphia, federal witnesses in Chicago, each murder executed with clinical efficiency that left no evidence and no survivors to testify. Siegel handpicked each man based on their specialties. 2 experts in hand-to-hand combat for subduing the target, 3 experienced drivers who could navigate city streets at high speed while evading police, 4 marksmen who could execute a man and make it look like natural causes if necessary, 2 specialists in body disposal who had dissolved more corpses in acid than they could remember. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, the kind of straightforward approach that had worked 100 times before. Kidnap Bumpy Johnson during his weekly Thursday night walk across neutral territory, transport him to the abandoned warehouse near the docks where dozens of other problems had been permanently solved, execute him with a single bullet to the head, dissolve the body in industrial acid until nothing remained but chemical sludge that could be poured into the Hudson River. Let dawn arrive clean and empty with no king ruling Harlem and no evidence that one had ever existed. For 2 weeks, Siegel's surveillance team tracked Bumpy Johnson's movements with obsessive attention to detail. They documented his patterns, photographed his associates, mapped his routes, timed his schedules down to the minute. The operation required certainty, the kind of knowledge that eliminated variables and guaranteed success. And in those 2 weeks of observation, they discovered exactly what they needed. Every Thursday night, precisely 10:15, Bumpy Johnson walked alone across West 116th Street, returning from some kind of meeting in Italian territory. 15 minutes of vulnerability, one man without bodyguards or backup, crossing through blocks where Siegel's people could operate without interference. It seemed like the fatal error that every gangster eventually made, the moment of carelessness that turned invincibility into mortality. Even the smartest criminals developed routines, habits, patterns that could be exploited by patient observers. Bumpy Johnson, for all his reputation and power, apparently wasn't immune to human nature. The surveillance team reported back with confidence. The target was predictable. The window of opportunity was consistent. Success was virtually guaranteed. Siegel approved the operation and set the date. March 21st, Thursday night, 10:15. The night Bumpy Johnson's reign would end, and a new order would be established in Harlem. A quick pause to ask for your support in our work. If you enjoy the incredible stories of Bumpy Johnson like we do, subscribe to our channel. What Bugsy Siegel's surveillance team didn't know, what they couldn't have discovered through observation alone because the truth was hidden beneath layers of deception, was that Bumpy Johnson had changed his actual route 3 months earlier. The Thursday night walk they documented so carefully was theater, an elaborate performance designed specifically to create the illusion of vulnerability. The meeting in Italian territory didn't exist. The apartment Bumpy entered through the front door was empty, except for a man named Thomas Washington, 48 years old, who happened to look remarkably similar to Bumpy when dressed in identical clothing. Thomas would enter at 10, wait 15 minutes while Bumpy exited through a back passage that connected to underground tunnels most people didn't know existed. Then Thomas would execute the famous walk across West 116th Street, while Bumpy attended his real meetings in locations known only to 7 people on Earth. The deception was perfect because it gave observers exactly what they expected to see. A predictable pattern, a moment of weakness, an opportunity that seemed genuine because it appeared natural. Bumpy had learned decades ago that the best way to control how enemies attacked you was to control what they observed, to feed them information that looked authentic but led them exactly where you wanted them to go. He had been performing this Thursday night walk for 12 weeks, knowing eventually someone would notice, someone would plan, someone would see opportunity where he had planted a trap. When Dorothy called with details of Siegel's plan, Bumpy Johnson sat in his leather chair for 10 seconds that stretched like hours, thinking through implications and possibilities with the speed of a mind that had been trained by survival to process complex scenarios instantly. Most men in his position would have gone underground, disappeared until the threat passed, used their network to avoid danger. That was the predictable response, the safe choice, the decision that would keep him alive but change nothing about his situation. Bumpy saw something bigger, something more valuable than mere survival. He saw opportunity disguised as threat. "They're coming Thursday night?" he asked calmly, voice giving nothing away. "Yes, sir. Warehouse 347 at the docks. 11 men, professionals, planning to execute you and dispose of the body." Bumpy remained silent for exactly 10 seconds while his mind calculated angles and risks and potential outcomes. Then he smiled in the darkness of his apartment, the kind of smile that would have terrified anyone who could see it. "Perfect. Let it happen exactly as they planned." Dorothy's voice carried confusion and fear. "Sir, they're going to kill you." Bumpy's smile widened. "No, Dorothy. They're going to try. There's a very significant difference." He spent the next 3 hours making telephone calls, each conversation brief and precise, assembling pieces of a plan that would transform an assassination into a demonstration of why underestimating Bumpy Johnson was the last mistake many men ever made. Over the following 3 days, Bumpy Johnson became director, choreographer, and strategist for an operation that required military precision. He summoned 5 men to his apartment, each arrival carefully timed and separated to avoid drawing attention. Marcus Williams, James Crawford, Robert Taylor, William Henderson, Samuel Jackson, all veterans of the Second World War, men who had stormed the beaches of Normandy, fought through France and Germany, killed Nazis with rifles and grenades and their bare hands when necessary, served their country with distinction and bravery that earned them medals and commendations. Then they came home to America, to Harlem, to a country that celebrated their service in speeches but denied them jobs, housing, basic dignity. White men who had never seen combat got positions based on veterans' preference, while these 5 heroes found every door closed, every application rejected, every opportunity denied because their skin color apparently erased their sacrifice. The military had trained them to be killers, taught them tactics and weapons and strategy, transformed them into efficient instruments of warfare. Then America abandoned them to poverty and invisibility. Bumpy Johnson had recruited each one personally, offering them purpose, income, respect, the chance to use their training for something other than carrying luggage or washing dishes. These were not street thugs or amateur criminals. These were soldiers who understood discipline, planning, coordinated action, the difference between chaos and controlled violence. Bumpy spread architectural plans of Warehouse 347 across his dining table, pointing to specific locations with the precision of a general planning battlefield strategy. You're going to enter this warehouse 2 days before they arrive. Tuesday night, 3 a.m., when the docks are empty and nobody's watching. Marcus, you take the southeast corner, elevated position on the support beam. James, northwest corner, behind those stacked crates that provide cover and firing angle. Robert, the crane platform gives you overview of the entire space. William, that office window overlooks the main floor. Samuel, the loading dock access gives you exit route and backup position. He marked each location with red ink, calculating firing angles and sight lines with mathematical precision. When I laugh, you have exactly 5 seconds before first elimination. No hesitation, no warning shots, no chances for them to react. We're not starting a gunfight. We're executing an operation. Surgical precision. Each of you has assigned targets based on position and threat level. No wasted ammunition. No collateral damage. Clean, efficient, professional. The 5 veterans nodded with understanding that came from shared experience. They had waited years for this kind of mission. This validation of their training and sacrifice. This wasn't crime. This was war against men who thought soldiers stopped being soldiers just because their country stopped caring about them. Bumpy rehearsed every element of his performance with obsessive attention to detail that bordered on madness, but was actually the key to survival. The laugh had to be perfect, genuine enough to confuse rather than warn, disturbing enough to create 3 crucial seconds of hesitation, timed precisely to give his shooters the window they needed. He practiced in front of his bedroom mirror for hours, experimenting with different tones and rhythms, watching his own face to ensure the expression matched the sound. Too forced, and it would sound fake, triggering defensive reactions. Too quiet, and it wouldn't create the disorientation required. Too crazy, and it might provoke immediate violence. The laugh had to hit the exact sweet spot of authentic amusement, mixed with disturbing confidence. The sound of a man who knew something his captors didn't, who found humor in their ignorance. He recorded himself on a wire recorder, played it back, adjusted, tried again. By Tuesday night he could produce the perfect laugh on demand, a sound that would haunt nightmares, that would make armed professionals hesitate, just long enough to die. 3 seconds of confusion were all he needed. 3 seconds would transform an execution into a massacre of the executors, would turn victims into victors, would prove that intelligence and preparation beat superior numbers and firepower. March 21st, 1947. Thursday night, 10:15 exactly. Bumpy Johnson walked alone down West 116th Street wearing his charcoal gray suit, pressed and perfect, his fedora tilted at exactly the angle that projected confidence without arrogance. Each step calculated and measured, posture relaxed like a man without concerns or enemies, hands visible and empty, face showing nothing but casual ease. Anyone watching that performance would have believed they were seeing a gangster who had grown careless, who had let success make him vulnerable, who was about to pay the ultimate price for predictability. No one observing could have guessed that he knew exactly what was coming, had known for 6 days, had spent every hour since planning how to transform his own kidnapping into victory. Great actors never reveal their performing. The best deceptions look completely natural, because they are built on understanding what observers expect to see. Bumpy gave Siegel's men exactly what they anticipated. A target following his routine, alone and apparently unaware, vulnerable in precisely the way their surveillance had documented. The street was quiet, most businesses closed, streetlights casting pools of yellow illumination separated by shadows deep enough to hide anything. Bumpy walked through light and shadow with steady rhythm, breathing normally. Heart rate controlled despite knowing the next few minutes would determine whether he lived or died, whether his empire survived or collapsed. The black van emerged from a side alley with practiced precision, engine noise deliberately muted, headlights off until the last moment. 6 men poured out with coordinated efficiency that demonstrated professional training and extensive rehearsal. Weapons drawn and pointed, positions calculated to prevent escape, movements synchronized like a machine designed for one purpose. Bumpy didn't run, didn't shout, didn't show panic or fear or any of the reactions that victims typically displayed. He simply stopped walking, raised his hands to shoulder height where they could be clearly seen, and arranged his face into an expression of mild surprise that would be expected from someone genuinely caught off guard. The lead kidnapper, a man around 40 years old with a scar bisecting his left eye that gave him the appearance of having seen and survived serious violence, stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had executed this kind of operation dozens of times before. "Bumpy Johnson," he announced with flat authority, gun trained on center mass. "Bugsy Siegel wants to have a conversation with you. You can come quietly, or we can make this difficult. Your choice, but choose fast." His tone made clear that both options ended the same way. The only variable was how much pain happened before the final bullet. Bumpy's response was perfectly calibrated to create maximum confusion while appearing cooperative. "Of course," he said with disturbing calmness, voice carrying no trace of fear or resistance. "I've always had respect for Bugsy Siegel. A man who can build an empire in the middle of the desert deserves a conversation." He walked toward the van without being pushed or dragged, entered voluntarily like an executive getting into a hired car for a business meeting, settled into the seat, adjusted his suit jacket to prevent wrinkles, crossed his legs with casual comfort. The kidnappers exchanged glances heavy with confusion. Victims were supposed to beg, negotiate, threaten, promise money or information, show fear that confirmed their captor's power. Bumpy acted like he had been expecting this pickup, like he was looking forward to whatever came next. Then he spoke the words that sent the first thread of real fear through professional killers. "Warehouse 347 at the docks?" he asked conversationally, tone suggesting he was confirming an appointment rather than his own execution location. Complete silence filled the van, tension so thick it was almost physical. The lead kidnapper pressed his pistol barrel against Bumpy's ribs hard enough to bruise. "How the hell do you know where we're taking you?" The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy with implications that these men's minds were just beginning to process. Bumpy looked out the van window as Brooklyn streets passed by, watching lights and buildings with apparent interest, ignoring the gun digging into his side like it was a minor inconvenience rather than a death threat. "I make it my business to know things," he replied with maddening calm. "Information is more valuable than money or weapons. You boys should learn that before someone teaches you the hard way." The lead kidnapper, whose name Bumpy would learn later was David Greenberg, pushed the gun harder against ribs, anger mixing with growing unease. "You think you're clever, Negro, but this game ends in 10 minutes when your brains are decorating the warehouse floor. Whatever you think you know doesn't matter when you're dead." Bumpy continued gazing out the window, face serene, apparently unconcerned about the increasingly violent threats. "You Italians were always direct. I admire that about your people. Jews are more subtle, better at long-term planning. Bugsy learned from the best of both worlds. Meyer Lansky taught him that patience and preparation beat reckless aggression. His casual discussion of mob bosses by first name, his analysis of their strategic styles, his complete lack of fear. All of it was designed to plant seeds of doubt, to make these professionals wonder what they were missing, what trap they might be walking into without realizing it. Warehouse 347 smelled like its entire history. Rotting fish from decades of seafood processing, motor oil from machinery that hadn't functioned in years, rust from metal exposed to salt air, and underneath all of that, the indefinable scent of violence, of blood and fear and death that had soaked into concrete and wood. Bumpy was pushed roughly toward the center of the empty space, illuminated only by a single bulb hanging from a chain, swaying slightly in drafts that came through gaps in the walls. 11 men formed a semicircle around him, weapons pointed with professional discipline. Thompson submachine guns capable of firing 600 rounds per minute. Smith & Wesson .38 revolvers, standard mob weapons that could put 6 bullets in a target before most people reacted. Sawed-off shotguns that could turn a human body into hamburger at close range. An arsenal sufficient for a small war, all of it pointed at one man standing calmly in a pool of yellow light. Bumpy counted the weapons with careful attention, noted the positions of each man, calculated angles and distances with the automatic precision of someone who had been in similar situations before and survived by noticing details other people missed. The odds were impossible. 11 armed professionals against one man with empty hands. Any rational analysis said he would be dead within minutes, but Bumpy Johnson had spent his entire life proving that rational analysis often missed the most important variables. David Greenberg walked forward with the swagger of a predator who had cornered helpless prey, confidence radiating from every step. Bugsy Siegel sends his regards and a message. The Harlem territory is now property of the organization. The Negro experiment is over. You've got 10 seconds to make peace with whatever god your people worship before we send you to meet him. He pressed the barrel of his .45 caliber pistol against Bumpy's stomach, with enough force to leave a bruise, establishing physical dominance, demonstrating that the power balance was absolute and irreversible. 9 pairs of eyes watched with the bored attention of professionals waiting to finish a job they had done many times before. They expected begging. They expected desperate offers of money or territory. They expected tears or rage or collapse. They expected human reactions to imminent death. What they got instead was so far outside their experience, so completely contrary to every execution they had ever participated in, that it short-circuited their training and left them frozen in confusion. Bumpy Johnson began to laugh, not the nervous giggle of someone losing control under stress, not the broken, hysterical cackle of sanity crumbling under pressure. A deep, genuine, profoundly disturbing laugh that echoed off warehouse walls like it was coming from a different dimension where normal rules didn't apply. He laughed like someone had just told the funniest joke he had ever heard, like the situation was so absurdly hilarious he couldn't contain his amusement. Bent slightly at the waist with the force of it, tears forming at the corners of his eyes, shoulders shaking. The laugh kept coming in waves that filled the warehouse with sound that made no sense given the circumstances. Every man with a gun felt ice water replace blood in their veins, instinct screaming that something was catastrophically wrong. People about to die don't laugh like that. Victims don't find humor in their own executions. The only explanation was that he knew something they didn't, that the power dynamic they assumed was absolute, was actually inverted in ways they couldn't see yet. The 11 soldiers froze like deer hearing a wolf's howl, fingers hovering near triggers, eyes scanning shadows with sudden paranoia, training fighting against confusion. David Greenberg's gun hand trembled imperceptibly, the first crack in professional composure. "What the fuck is so funny?" he shouted, voice rising with the first notes of fear trying to disguise itself as anger. Bumpy wiped a tear from the corner of his eye with thumb, took a deep breath to control the laughter, smiled with satisfaction that looked genuinely amused rather than terrified. "You boys really think I came here alone, don't you?" he said with perfect comic timing, delivering the punchline that transformed comedy into horror. "You actually believe I would walk into my own execution without preparing for exactly this scenario? That's the funniest thing I've heard all year. Really. Thank you for that. 3 seconds of complete hesitation. 3 seconds where professional killers' eyes swept the warehouse shadows, searching for threats they hadn't checked for, finding nothing but also finding no comfort in the darkness. 3 seconds where fingers tensioned on triggers but didn't pull because something was wrong. Something fundamental was broken about this situation, and firing without understanding was how professionals got killed. 3 seconds of paralysis while minds processed that they might have been outmaneuvered, that the prey might actually be the predator. And in those 3 precious seconds of frozen confusion, Bumpy Johnson moved with the speed and precision of a viper striking a mouse too stupid to run. His left hand deflected the pistol pressed against his stomach, with a disarmament technique taught to military police, redirecting the barrel away from his body while his right hand pulled a .45 caliber revolver from the holster hidden at the small of his back. Movement so fast it seemed supernatural. He jerked David Greenberg forward as a human shield while the man's brain was still processing the motion, wrapping his left arm around Greenberg's throat, pressing his own gun against the hostage's temple. In the same instant, 5 shapes materialized from shadows above like demons emerging from hell. Marcus Williams from the southeast support beam, James Crawford from behind northwest crates, Robert Taylor from the crane platform, William Henderson from the office window, Samuel Jackson from the loading dock access. 5 black men that white gangsters had walked past without checking, without considering threats, because their racism made them invisible. 5 veterans armed with military rifles, positioned in elevated locations that provided perfect firing angles, sights trained on assigned targets. The trap was sprung. The ambush was complete. The hunters had become the hunted. Bumpy's first 2 shots were fired before David Greenberg's body finished its journey from standing to hostage, before the other 10 men fully processed what was happening. 2 soldiers closest to Bumpy, positioned slightly forward of the semicircle, took rounds through their foreheads that punched through skull and brain, and killed them before their bodies understood they were dead. They dropped like puppets with cut strings, no drama, just instant transition from alive to dead. The 5 veterans opened fire with coordinated precision that demonstrated hundreds of hours of combat experience. Each man had studied his assigned targets during reconnaissance, knew exactly where they would be standing, had already calculated bullet trajectory and wind resistance, and a dozen other variables that separated amateur shooters from professionals. Marcus took out Soldier 3, the man holding the Thompson submachine gun. 3 rounds to center mass before the weapon could even begin to rotate. James eliminated Soldier 4, whose wild spray of return fire hit ceiling, walls, empty crates, everything except actual threats. Robert's rifle cracked once, and Soldier 5, running for the single exit door, discovered it was chained shut before a bullet entered the base of his skull and ended his escape attempt. Soldiers 6 and 7, positioned too close together because they hadn't anticipated needing defensive spacing, panicked and fired at shadows, at movement, at ghosts. Their bullets found each other in the confusion of muzzle flashes and gunpowder smoke filling the warehouse. Soldier 8 tried to negotiate surrender, hands raised, weapon dropped, screaming that he gave up. Samuel Jackson's bullet between his eyes answered that plea because Bumpy had given explicit orders. No prisoners except the messenger. This wasn't about mercy or civilization. This was about sending a message written in blood that couldn't be misunderstood. Soldier 9 managed to fire 3 shots wildly before Williams' rifle round caught him in the throat, dropping him to his knees, drowning in his own blood while his body twitched through death. Soldier 10 and 11, the 2 most experienced killers in the group, both Murder Incorporated veterans with dozens of successful executions, managed coordinated return fire that came remarkably close to hitting actual targets. But close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, and in 59 seconds of controlled chaos, professional training without intelligence support meant nothing against preparation and superior positioning. 59 seconds from Bumpy's laugh to final silence. His internal stopwatch counted every second like a conductor tracking tempo, ensuring every movement hit its mark at precisely the right moment. 10 bodies on the warehouse floor, blood spreading in pools that reflected the swaying light bulb, creating abstract artwork from death. Only David Greenberg remained alive, kneeling in pooling blood that wasn't his. Bumpy's .45 pressed against his temple, urine running down his legs and soaking his expensive Italian trousers. The 5 veterans descended from their positions with weapons still trained on the survivor, forming a new semicircle that inverted the previous formation. Now 11 had become 1, and that one was learning what terror truly meant. Bumpy lowered himself slowly into a crouch, maintaining the gun against Greenberg's head, looking directly into eyes that had gone from confident to shattered in less than a minute. "What's your name?" he asked with the patient tone of a teacher working with a slow student. David's response came in fragments, voice destroyed by trauma. David G. Greenberg." His entire body shook with involuntary tremors, shock setting in, mind struggling to process how completely the situation had reversed. Bumpy nodded like they were having a pleasant conversation over coffee. "David, you're going to live through tonight. Not because I'm merciful. Not because I feel sorry for you. Because you have one remaining function that holds value. You're a messenger now. The only job you'll ever have again that matters." He pulled a handkerchief from his breast pocket, carefully wiped blood splatter from his face, maintained eye contact with David the entire time. "You go back to Bugsy Siegel. You tell him exactly what happened here. Don't leave out any details. Make sure he understands what 59 seconds of overconfidence cost him. Then you give him a choice from me. He can sit at the negotiating table with me as an equal partner and prosper controlling Las Vegas while I control New York. Or he can continue treating me like a problem to be eliminated and discover that Harlem buries secrets deeper than the Nevada desert ever could. The desert preserves bodies, David. The Hudson River dissolves evidence until nothing remains. Do you understand the difference?" Bumpy's voice never rose above conversational volume, which somehow made the threat more terrifying than shouting would have been. He stood slowly, brushing dust and blood from his suit jacket like he was preparing for a business meeting, keeping the pistol trained on David because mercy had limits and trust was earned. "After you deliver that message to Bugsy, you're going to visit Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano. You'll repeat what I told you word for word. No improvisation, no personal interpretation. You'll tell them that Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson doesn't ask permission to sit at the table with powerful men. He builds his own table and decides who gets invited to sit at it. Men who underestimate me become statistics in police reports. Men who respect me become partners in empire. They can choose which category they prefer to occupy." Bumpy stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than any shout. "And David, one more thing. This is important, so pay attention. The next time you people plan something against me, make absolutely certain that no waiters, drivers, secretaries, janitors, maids, porters, or cleaning women are anywhere nearby. Because in Harlem, everyone works for me, even when you're convinced they work for you. Invisibility is the superpower that white men gave me when you decided black people weren't worth noticing. I weaponized your racism. I turned your blindness into my intelligence network. You taught me how to beat you by refusing to see me as fully human. Thank you for that gift." David Greenberg stumbled out of Warehouse 347 at 11:34 p.m., traumatized beyond any possibility of recovery, carrying the weight of 10 corpses and a message that would fundamentally alter the power structure of American organized crime. He drove straight to Las Vegas, hands trembling on the steering wheel, checking rear-view mirrors obsessively, jumping at every sound, reliving 59 seconds of violence that had destroyed his certainty about how the world worked. 3 days later, Bugsy Siegel received the full report, read it twice while his cigar burned down to ash in the crystal tray, crumpled the paper, and felt genuine fear for one of the few times in his adult life. The man who had built a casino empire through ruthless violence and strategic brilliance understood he had encountered something outside his experience. A black man in America who was smarter, better prepared, and more dangerous than the white criminals who thought they ruled the underworld. 2 months later, April 1947, in a private room at the Copacabana nightclub that cost more to reserve for one evening than most families earned in 6 months, Bumpy Johnson sat at a round table with Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, and 3 other mob bosses who controlled American organized crime. not as a subordinated partner, not as a token Negro allowed temporary access to prove white tolerance, as an absolute equal who had forced respect through 59 seconds of perfectly executed violence and years of building an intelligence network that made him untouchable. The room was decorated with expensive art. The whiskey was aged 30 years. The cigars were Cuban contraband. And the men around that table represented more wealth and power than most countries. Lucky Luciano, the man who had organized crime into a corporate structure, who had killed and bribed his way to the top of the American underworld, raised his crystal glass in a toast. To the man who taught us that real power doesn't come from money or political connections or superior numbers. Real power comes from thinking 3 moves ahead when everyone else is still reacting to the last move. To the man who proved that intelligence beats force, that preparation defeats surprise, that respect is earned through competence rather than gifted through tolerance. Welcome to the table, Bumpy. You built your own throne, and we're smart enough to recognize a king when we see one. The room erupted in applause, genuine respect from men who rarely respected anyone. Bumpy Johnson smiled, sipped his whiskey, and understood that he had accomplished something most black men in 1947 America couldn't imagine. He had forced white criminals to treat him as an equal by being better at their game than they were. The King of Harlem had proven that intelligence, preparation, and the courage to walk into a trap when you knew it was coming could overcome any advantage of numbers, weapons, or institutional racism. His throne was built on the foundation of 59 seconds that changed everything, and the decades of strategic thinking that made those 59 seconds possible. If you enjoyed our content, consider clicking the button. New exclusive stories every day.